Hello, Stretch. This is by long and far the craziest stage I've ever stood on. And I hope we'll have a little bit of fun in the next 40 minutes. My name is Tim. I lead change and innovation at a company called GE. And I'll talk about goats. What an obvious choice. Here is a couple of things I will not do. I will not tell you what we have done at GE. Here's the reason why. None of you is responsible to change GE. So why would I need to tell you what I have done? Right? What I want to do is I want to invite you to take a journey with me, to discover a couple of things and to make you think, which is good because you don't need to move. There's going to be trivia, so I will be asking questions in between, and it would be awesome if you would, feedback verbally, or I might ask for a show of hands. No standing up needed. Also, you might have seen the Post-its on the seats. I have no idea what they're for. Niels would probably get, they're Niels. So if you want to get Niels really nervous, eat them. Right, that's what he said. So that's what I want to do, right? And then I'll be here for 3 days, and I hope we get to talk a little and have conversations, because this is really just a little bit of a mind game that I want to play with you, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did when I put it together. With that, don't blame the goats. Get a goat herd. The number one question that people ask, because I tried this speech this morning at a different event. I'm reducing risk. I ran a first MVP for the startup guys on this, and it worked quite nicely. There's a very simple answer. I talk about goats because of this. Any Chinese speakers in the room? It's like impossible to see anything with the lights. So no Chinese speakers. This is a yarn. And most probably you say that differently, but I don't speak a word of Chinese. It's a symbol of the goat, because 2015 and a little bit of 2016 is called the year of the goat. Now, what do you think of when you hear the word goat? Anyone? Come again? Animal. 5 points for you, sir. Free beer on me. What type of characteristic or, psychological traits do you expect a goat to have? Slow. Stubborn. That's how we know goats. And matter of fact, I am a goat too. I was born in the year of the goat. Quite interesting. If you know there is 12 animals, you can figure out how old I am. 24. That's not funny. Anyways, hey guys, if you want me to stick to the time, you should start the clock. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking for the next 2 days. So I figured, I'm a goat. What does that mean? And what is a goat? And then I looked it up. I Googled it, as usual, to figure out what a goat was like. And I was like, that is interesting. And I didn't think about it anymore or any further until I found this. To summarize the story for you, in this scenario, the goat was supposed to be food to the Siberian tiger. But the goat decided it was much funnier to hack that tiger. The goat ended up sleeping in the tiger's bed while the tiger slept outside. I was very compelled by this story, and I thought, what is it that goats have? And what would you need to do if you were working with an incredible amount of very stubborn people? This line did not work well this morning. It was an event at GE. And I didn't say they were stubborn, but they looked at me like, we're not. And they're not. They're good people. We had a lot of fun. So my thinking was, if I would figure out what a goat herd does, maybe I could create some movement, and maybe we could create some change. Now, if you want to find out what a goat herd looks like, first trivia question coming up, what do you do? Of course. What else would you do? You Google. Goat herd. Right? Goat herd is an actual word. It's the person manning the goats. And as you can see nothing. Because there's way too much data. As usual, there's always too much data. So what you do is you zoom in a little, and what you find is this. A goat herd. And the goat herd in this picture meets all the criteria that you would expect of a goat herd. Male, old, goats, and a stick. Brilliant. All my confirmation bias has been appealed to. I have validation of what I was looking for. And then I looked again, and I found this. Ooh, what a surprise. A goat herd does not necessarily need to be old. They can be young. And then there is something that is completely and utterly crazy. This particular goat herd is even female. Hey guys, how you doing? Goat herds don't come by gender or by age. They come by role and by what they do and by how they behave. The most interesting piece is the absence of a goat herd. Because if there is no goat herd around, chaos ensues. Trivia time. What was the one object, item, or thing you saw in every single picture? Stick? No. Goat. Very good. It's amazing software, right? I say something and it magically appears on the wall. I wish somebody would write a program for that eventually. What else did you see? Was it one goat in every picture? Another goats, many goats. Is there a shorter way of saying many goats? Because many goats doesn't fit into the bubble, right? And we need a different word. You call that a herd, right? So there were herds in every picture. And then there's one last thing that was, let's say, around the goat and the herd. Anyone? You got to speak up a little bit. It's like very boundary. That's one I said. What else? Nature, people, the environment. Now the environment, again, it's a very long word, and I don't like it if I have to break words into two in these bubbles, because then the graphic recorders have a really tough time. Let's call it the world. So now you have an index of what I will be talking about in the next 40 minutes, because that's the time I have remaining by now. Let's start with the world. And somebody wave at me like crazy at 20 minutes, so I know I'm at the half-point time. Let's start by looking at the world. And this is, of course, not a conclusive view of the world, because we don't have 6 hours. We have about 2 minutes to understand that. So here's one way of looking at the world. Any guess? Oil price, right? Good. I like a smart audience. This is the oil price. And as you can see, there is not a whole lot happening in the first, 30 years. It's very boring. Up until like here-ish. 2002, 2003. Somebody, a very clever journalist, figures out, ooh, the price of oil is picking up. It's about time I write an article on that, and I'll call it, how crazy would it be if the oil price reached $100? A smart guy, he didn't have to wait for long. right? Because the oil price did reach $100. And then, of course, he had learned that you can extrapolate from the past to understand the future, which we all know works perfectly well. And he wrote another article called, "What Happens if the Price of Oil Reaches $200? Which is utterly stupid, because it doesn't go there. It starts to fluctuate. It's another way of looking at the volatility of the world. And it's not a complete economic indicator, but it's a really interesting way of looking at the economy, because a lot of stuff depends on the price of oil. Something else is happening at the same time. Where do you go when you want to figure out what's going on from an innovation and progress type of view in the world? What's the one place you go to understand what the future brings? Shower. We learned this morning, right? Really cool. And it's actually true, right? And that's like a beer conversation, but I figured out the difference between complex and complicated while I was in the shower in Budapest 4 weeks ago. No, Barcelona. It's so funny. I'm not joking. I went to Berlin, Budapest, Bilbao, and Barcelona in 4 consecutive weeks, and I got completely confused. So no, but where do you go if you want to find out what is happening from an innovation perspective? Anyone? YouTube is good, but if you want to physically move, you're like, oh, I feel adventurous. I want to go somewhere nice and warm and by the sea. The Silicon Valley, maybe. That's what people normally yell back at me, and then I can say, no, that's wrong, because it's wrong. Awesome! Wrong answer. Thank you for helping out. I have 6 beer tickets, 2 are gone. So, if you want to secure one that I asked for, you got to pick it up a little bit. A friend of mine always says Silicon Valley is an assisted living community for 20-somethings. It's not representative of what is really happening in the world. So what I picked is a different place, and you all have seen the picture, for a large organization, a lot of followers, very forward-thinking. The Vatican, of course. So 2005, in the Vatican, you can see the penetration of technology. It's almost pervasive, but not quite. 8 years later, same place. Boom. Technology is in everybody's hand. It's ubiquitous. We live in the world as is. What has changed? As is an acronym. What has changed is the access people have. Access to information, markets, and services is at a whole new level. There's no more boundaries to entry. If I need 10,000 servers tomorrow, all I need is a credit card. If I want to understand the price of potatoes in southwest Mali, I can Google that, right? Those barriers are gone. The other thing that has picked up tremendously is speed. Things are as fast as they have never been before. Today is the fastest day that you have ever seen in your life. And at the very same time, today is the slowest day you will ever see for the rest of your life, because things are just accelerating. Now you combine that with technology, and something really magical happens. Does anyone, this is the show of hands question, does anyone remember Madonna? Good, never works with the young audience. Does anyone remember what Madonna said about young lovers? That's a tricky one. Madonna said, they don't know what they're doing, but they do it all night long. Why do I talk about Madonna in the context of digital transformation? Easy. Computers are like Madonna's young lovers. They don't know what they're doing, but they do it all night long. If you orchestrate this environment well, you can offload all of the stupid work to a machine, and the machine does it for you. And then something truly magical happens. You get an influx of intellect. Something you could refer to as human cognitive surplus. As things stand, the only intelligent constituent in this world is the human by now. And if we focus our minds, we can solve the most complicated and complex processes and problems in the world. And then the technology helps us to make it happen. And the world that we live in, the world as is, helps us to scale. That is the S, because you get instant global reach. Can you stop the time while people are taking pictures? That is the world that we live in, my perspective on the world that we live in. So the next thing that we need to look at is, what does the herd look like? And it's very easy to understand what a herd is doing. We'll look at 4 things in herd behavior. When you look at a herd, they move, right? They move here, and then they move over there, and they move somewhere else. And once the herd gets tired, they sleep. And if we talk about 2-legged goats, what they love to do is they love to communicate, like we're communicating now, right? And then they all like to consume. This is original herd behavior that is true for humans 100,000 years ago already. Now, there is something that happens about 200 years ago, which is like the original disruption that destroys that model and introduces a variance that is really unhealthy. It's called the Industrial Revolution. We stop movement. People now go to factories. And they no longer decide on work-life balance because that concept didn't exist before. People become labor. They're being forced into a 9-to-5. That didn't work in Neanderthal. You couldn't say like, oh, it's a woolly mammoth, and I could hunt that and eat. Oh no, 6 o'clock. Right? Because you would die if you didn't eat. With the Industrial Revolution, now that becomes natural, even though it's very unnatural. What people do is they become paid for effort. It's not about the outcome people produce. It's like, oh, you put 8 hours in. Cool. Here is your $80, your $160, or your $25,000 if you're a CEO. And with that, people invent something that is an economic optimization algorithm called laziness. Because now it's beneficial to be lazy because you work more, which means you get paid more, so all of that is much more fun. To battle that, we invent a science we call management. Because now you need to fight the laziness. But then something crazy happens. Stuff like mobile phones and social networks sift into the workplace. Digital disruption happens. And people, for some way or reason, find back to the core of where they come from. They want to be mobile again because they can with mobile phones. They want to get their work-life balance on a new level. They want to decide what they do and when they do it. They also want to communicate freely with others without boundaries across organizations or geographic boundaries or anything else. And of course, they still want to consume. Now, if we take this into a business context, there is 4 very interesting companies you can look at. Any guess of a very successful company that helps people to move? Let me help you. Uber owns not a single car and is the biggest transportation company on the planet. Sleep? Now it's easy, right? Communicate? Well, it's media. So what's the biggest media company? Facebook. Last one is sometimes a surprise and sometimes not, depending on how much you read. Amazon. Alibaba, because it's not Amazon. Interesting. Balance sheets of these companies are super light because they don't have assets. They orchestrate stuff. They develop the operating model that is eating the world, as my friend Aaron Dingman calls it. They own the customer interface and they orchestrate all of those resources on the bottom. Now, if we derive some principles so you can take those things home with you and think about them, there's also 4 herd principles 2.0, if you will. What they focus on, like we did originally, is we focus on outcomes for our customers, solving a real problem. We do that at radical speed because we live in so fast, volatile times. Adjusting quickly is incredibly important. These organizations are there to do one thing with absolute precision: learning. They're learning organizations. Anyone ever been to Berlin? Anyone ever been to Berlin in the last 3 months? On the door of about 40% of the cabs in Berlin is advertising for which company? Uber. This is like a pharmacy advertising cigarettes and alcohol. But Uber understood the problem of the driver. The driver needs people that want to ride with him and needs a cheap and easy way to get their money. They changed their business model in Berlin to intermediate cab drivers to people like myself that only use Uber because I keep losing the receipts. And if I lose a receipt, I can't reimburse it and I have to pay it myself. But with Uber, I get an email. And that is, hard to lose. All of these organizations are doing it with zero heritage, which means they're not afraid of taking a risk because they're not risking much. None of these organizations existed before 2000, with the exception of Alibaba, which was 99. And to make you feel really good, none of them is run by a person that is yet 40 years old. It's always a bit of a downer. I'm 24, so for me that's cool. That is what herds and exceptionally successful herds are behaving like today. Which means we now need to look at the last constituent in the equation. We finally need to look at the goat. And to look at the goat, I want to tell you a little story. But before I start, we have to drop the room temperature by about 37 degrees. This is where I live. This is the Black Forest, the southwestern corner of Germany, because as you can tell from my harsh accent, I'm German. And it gets very cold in winter, between minus 15 and minus 17 degrees is usual. So imagine that, it's minus 17 degrees right now. And let me introduce a goat. I made that picture. I made the kid too, but it would be highly inappropriate to say that. That's my son, Bo, and he's 5 years old. And he's in a forest kindergarten, which means he is outside. He's also outside in minus 15 degrees. And yes, he's also outside when it rains. That's the first question. What do you do if it rains? He gets wet. Sensational. So imagine the following situation. It's 7 o'clock in the morning and Bo has to go to kindergarten. And I tell Bo, please put on a jacket. And of course, he does oblige. That is not a jacket that you want to wear in minus 15 degrees. In fact, Bo doesn't want to wear any clothes. He's in his boxer shorts and t-shirts. And what I was thinking of was this. But Bo doesn't like red. So what do? Who's got kids? Who's got more than 5? That'd be crazy. So if you have kids, you know that one way of getting your kid to comply is play on your size and age, right? It's a very convenient way. I am your father! Put on the jacket! And it works. It works. It eventually works. It's also something I would call the second best approach you can take. Because you shouldn't say bullshit on stage. Money. Yeah, bribe him. Money and 5-year-olds, different story, but I can swap 5 10-cent coins to €1 with him because he likes 5 coins more than 1 coin. So let's talk about money and 5-year-olds at a later point of time. Of course, I motivate him by force. Put it on! And we get to the kindergarten. And then the next morning comes, and it's still minus 15 degrees. And now I tell Bo, please put on the red jacket. And of course, now he's a smart kid. He has learned. He says, sure, Dad. And he puts on the jacket and goes. Just, that's not how kids work. He's like, no, and we have the same fighting situation again. But I now know something, and I have learned something that I can maybe hack him a little bit. So what I do is I take all of his clothes and I put them onto the heater. So I preheat all of the clothes. And then I pack up all the clothes into a backpack and I put that into my car and I switch on the stationary heating of my car to make it really warm. And when my son says, no, I want to go in boxer short and t-shirt, I say, all right, you win, we go. Little guy is now really happy. I showed him. And we walk out and he drops into the car and it's really nice and warm and cozy and he sits in his little seat and he's the king of the world while I drive the 4 minutes to the kindergarten. And as we arrive, his perception changes a little bit because the other kids, what a surprise, are not in boxer short and t-shirt because it's minus 15 degrees and it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, all right, let's go. Grab him out of the seat, I put him down, and he stands there and he looks at me because he's fucking cold. Now again, you have 2 options. You can go and say, see, you little shit, I told you. Again, second best option. What you do is you pick him up, you put him into your trunk, and you give him these pre-warmed clothes. This is a massive game of deltas, because now he is cold, and now he is warm. If you want to drive that point home, you hug him, and you tell him that you love him, and then you send him off. And the next morning, there is a different game. All of a sudden, my son likes red. And then a year passes, and you start all over again because there's so much other stuff that happened in between, he completely forgot about it. But that's not what we're talking about. What made this successful? How, why does it work? Well, you have to have a certain level of resilience, which sometimes I think of an intelligent stubbornness. Right? Stay calm. It'll happen. It'll work. Somehow this will work out. And you have to be aware of why you're doing something. You have to understand the purpose. I'm trying to teach the little guy a lesson in a way he can understand. You cannot stick to your ways. You have to be agile in the way you do this. Changing your approach constantly and trying something new and different. And to do that effectively, you have to understand the mindset of this other person. You have to have empathy. This is one way of how you can drive a lot of change. Now, to do this proper, you can understand the underlying model, which looks like the following. We all make experiences. Talking of my son, he did experience that it's really cold if he's not wearing clothes in kindergarten. If you do that repeatedly over time, he does believe that to be true. It fosters a certain level of beliefs. And the way I treat him and the way I work with him, I do give him certain values, which are super important, because the values ultimately drive the actions. The picture is complete now. It's a very simple framework of, how people are behaving and doing things. And what you need to understand if you want to empathize is the set of experiences you have made is different from a person you're working with. And it doesn't matter if the person is 5 years old or 55 years old. There's a slight difference because a 55-year-old person, on average, has more experience than a 5-year-old. Now, if you take this into a context of how a human being usually works, you have to understand the Maslow hierarchy of needs. Anyone heard that before, hierarchy of needs? Good, it's going to be simple. So you have physiological needs. You need to eat and sleep and drink and procreate for fun and to secure the race. You have a certain feeling that you need safety in your life, and safety means something different to everybody. So think of, what's your vantage point? What are you looking at, and from where are you looking? Did a road trip in Africa and a road trip in the US, very different perspectives of what is important to people. Over time, you get a sense of belonging. You belong to a herd. You heard herd before, right? So you belong to something, and that builds your esteem over time. And then ultimately what you can work on is called your self-actualization. I had to shorten that a little bit, it looked really odd. You want to work on stuff that you want to work on. Now, if you overlay that green pyramid I was showing earlier into this, it's actually true at every single level. And what we do as we do these learnings in these areas is we stack up a huge pile of these layers on the experience horizon. Now, what needs to happen at times is you need to unlearn certain things, because maybe the world in which you live has changed and is changing still. But to unlearn certain things, you have to question what you saw. You have to disrupt yourself, because usually your experience and your knowledge is locked into your subconscious. It's called a subconscious competence that you can't get to unless something detrimental is happening. That is the magic burning platform people talk about ever so often. A motivator so strong that it threatens your feeling of safety or even your physiological needs, which makes you question everything and unlock it. And then you can unlearn and relearn certain things. Now, this is true for an individual. If you look at it from an organizational perspective, because otherwise it'd be too easy if you knew that, and you could easily massage it, there is certain factors that are locking in that pyramid. There is always scarcity of resource, which, by the way, is an illusion, because there is no scarcity of resource. Usually when I do these simulations and games with people, ever so often I deliberately give them 5x or 10x of the resources they need. Unequivocally, they screw up because they have too much resources and they cannot run the administration on all the stuff they have. People, especially people that get towards self-actualization, are driven by the fear of loss. They think that extrapolating from the past tells them something about the future, and then they act in a way to preserve what they have, preserving status, money, power, whatever it is. So people fear that loss, and that means they cannot change their ways. They cannot unlearn, because people generally love to resist to change. Picture is complete. People are not afraid of something new. You cannot be afraid of something you don't know. They are afraid of losing something they already have or had. That is driving their behavior. With that, we have looked at all three segments, the world, the herd, and the goat. Particularly, you can now infer how the goat behaves as part of the herd, and hopefully you can derive, because I said this is mind jogging a little bit for you, what that means to the world. There is one thing that we have not at all spoken about. The goat herd. Looking at the picture, does anyone want to take a guess where the goat herd should sit? In the middle. What a radical thought. That is where the goat herd sits. Now let me ask you a second question. Why does the goat herd sit in the middle? Because it looks nice. No. Yeah. Actually, he does not only have to consider the world, he's also a part of the herd. And here's the kicker. The goat herd himself is a goat. It's much more natural to follow the same species than to follow a different species. And empathizing for the same species is much easier than empathizing for a different species. Ever tried to understand your cat? It can't be done. 2% of cats are allergic to humans, by the way. It's quite funny. So the goat is part of this ecosystem. He sits on the inside, and now you might wonder, okay, so what does a goat herd do? So let's conveniently zoom in a little bit, and let's look into the goat herd, what they need. In the context of an organization, the organization needs to admit, this is the Alcoholics Anonymous moment, that there is a need to have a goat herd. Once they understand they need a goat herd, they need to find a goat or a human that has the necessary skills. That person does not only need to have the skills, he also needs to enjoy doing it. It could be a she too, by the way. All ages and sizes. I spoke about that earlier. And last but not least, because there's Maslow's hierarchy of need, and people want to work on self-actualization and they need security, you do need to reward that goat herd. If all these four things intersect, it's not complete yet. So funny. And the goat herd hits that middle. She does find purpose. Now it's complete. And that makes the entire difference to allow a goat herd to do what he or she is supposed to do. So we spoke about the world, the herd, the goats, and we spoke about the goat herd. We spoke about the qualities of a goat herd and what they need to do. With that, I think it's pretty obvious what your next step is. You need to get a goat herd. Here is another little kicker. Get a goat herd does not mean you go and get a goat herd. What it means is you get a goat herd. And when you get what a goat herd is, you become a goat herd. My name is Steigert, and I'm a goat herd at GE.